Welcome on to the next edition of the Faster Beyond 50 podcast. My name is Brad Nadelt. We've got the coach, Lindsey Parry, with us once again. And in today's podcast, we are going to be talking about salt tablets and whether or not they are actually worth taking. We're going to be talking about training at altitude, compression gear. Does compression gear actually work? We're also going to talk a little bit about running shoes. And one of my favorite topics is cycling versus running and how much cycling equals running. Like, can you just exchange one for one? Does it work that way? We'll find out on today's podcast. It is a Q&A episode, and it's a very warm welcome to Coach Lindsey Parry, who celebrated a birthday last week. Some great messages coming through. Birthday wishes, Lindsey. I hope you had a great birthday week. Things going swimmingly in the build up to Berlin?
Yeah, so I had a great week, great birthday week. And then training was swam against my own advice. So I've had to give myself a talking to. And Tutu has had to give me a talking to because I spent most of last week sore, right? So after our discussion in last week's podcast where we actually spoke about this, overtraining, under recovery, whatever you want to call it, and then, the running too hard on easy days. Well, it started with me. The first one was situational. Sorry, I won't make the story too long, but the first one was situational. I found myself in a place where I did a lot of my intervals on downhills. So that made me a bit sore because that increases the eccentric load. And then Wednesday, I went out to join a new running group because I felt like I needed to have a slightly longer midweek run and just slightly faster. And these oaks showed no mercy, and they don't wait. They don't even look back. So I was just running to keep up, and oh my goodness, I've been so sore since then. Need to sort that stuff out. That was last week Wednesday. Fortunately, feeling a lot better right now, but I felt like I'd run a race. I was so sore after that. So yeah, guys, I sometimes also mess up, but for the next 10 weeks, I will just do what Ntutu tells me to do and do it in the way that he tells me to do it.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that, Lindsey, because we spoke last week exactly about the thing where I was running with a group at the running club and going a little bit too on. And it happened again to me this week as well. And I actually consciously decided I was going to run even slower. So I was a bit further behind the group that I was running with. And it was the same two ladies that I was running with this last week. And at the end of the run on Thursday at the club, the one came to me and said, "Oh, Tish, we feel so bad that we're holding you up, but thank you so much for sticking just around us, just from a safety perspective." And I didn't have the heart to tell her that I was actually hanging on for dear life, that they definitely weren't holding me up. I was actually running harder than I should have. But it's maybe I need to find new running friends. I think that's what the problem is, Lindsey. It sounds like you need to do too. Find slightly slower. I think that is the plan. Let's jump into today's questions, Lindsey. The first one is from Sarah Thompson. And don't forget, if you have a question you'd like to submit, you can click on the link that's in the description to this podcast as well. We love hearing from you. And if there's any feedback you'd like to share with us on the podcast as well, if there's topics you'd like us to discuss, not necessarily a specific question you have, you're more than welcome to pop them in there as well. This one coming from Sarah saying, "Hi, Coach Parry. I'm an experienced ultra runner getting back into training after a long break due to a torn plantar fascia and bone damage." Oof, that sounds painful. I started a 10K plan with 4 runs a week, but I know my foot can't handle that yet. I'd like to swap one of the runs, probably the Saturday, for a cross-training session like cycling or swimming. How do I approach the swap? Should I match the time, the intensity, or is it something else? Is it like for like when it comes to cross-training, Lindsey?
So it's not. It's not like for like. And I would say that cycling is a better cross-training option for running. The crossover benefits are much better. And then coupled with that, it's just very hard to actually work out what is the like for like from a cardiovascular perspective between swimming and running. I would probably, if I was forced to guess, I would guess that the swimming to running from a time perspective is probably 1-to-1 from a physiological adaptation point of view in terms of time. So not kilometers, obviously, or distance in terms of time, but it's a much, much lower eccentric load. And so I think it's not a great crossover. So yes, cardiovascularly all good, but there's not a big crossover. Cycling, definitely a better crossover, but we still don't have the eccentric load. And so if we, strictly speaking, look at kind of some research that's been done around the physiological crossover between cycling and running, you're looking at somewhere between 3 and 4 times the duration on a bike than on a run. Now, that's not practical advice, to be honest, because like if you've got a 1 hour run, no one's got 4 hours or 3 hours to sit on a bike to do the crossover. But because there is a lower eccentric load, I would push the intensity up a little bit on the bike so that you're pushing much closer to the top of your zone 2. And then you're probably looking at somewhere between 1.5 to 2. So that's an hour run, an hour and a half to 2 hours on the bike, which is much more manageable. And quite frankly, I think in this scenario, it's crazy to do the 4 runs, and you actually know that you can't, and your body won't handle the 4 runs. So if you've only got an hour to cycle, then only cycle for an hour. I mean, we're not going to lose our ton. So yes, maybe it should be an hour and a half. Maybe it should be a bit longer than that even. But you're not, by not doing that extra 2 hours, you're not losing that much. You lose a lot more by not doing anything. So yeah, I guess in summary, it's a very good option to do cross training. If you really want to be strict about it and you've got the time, 3 to 4 times is the number. But I would just say pretty close to like for like is good enough.
Cool. Sarah, thank you so much for that question. Next one from James. James Whitaker, who's from Bath in England. He's 62 years old, Lindsey. James says, I've developed runner's knee in both knees. I suspect the initial cause may have been running in an old pair of Asics gels with around 500 to 600 miles on them. I recently got fitted for new Brooks, and they felt great during a 7-mile run on Sunday. But since then, the pain has flared up in my right knee again. The left was already an issue. I've paused all interval sessions to let things settle. Any other advice for managing this? And is it possible that switching the shoes has contributed to this issue?
Yeah, so the answer is all of the above. And so the initial problem could well have been, is most likely caused by the old shoes. And then what we get once the pain is present is some neural inhibition. So in other words, the muscles don't work the way that they're supposed to work. And that coupled with the fact that we're now in a new pair of shoes, not just new as in out the box, but new as in those are not shoes that you're used to running in. And so the mechanics are going to be slightly different, along with the fact that there's probably some neural inhibition still from the original irritation. And so you've got a recipe for now you're not quite running the way that you should. The muscles, particularly the quadricep muscles, aren't doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. And now you're getting some maltracking of the patella. The kneecap isn't going nice and smoothly through the groove in the femur like it's supposed to. So yeah, some basic rehabilitation just to make sure that you get those muscles firing again, ensuring that the glutes in particular are firing, ensuring that the quads are doing the work they're supposed to do, particularly the vastus medialis oblique. That's the little teardrop muscle on the inside of your knee. It's quite a small muscle, and its job is to keep the patella in the middle. And so if you've got like dominance of the vastus or rectus, the on the outside, the lateralis, and the rectus femoris, if you've got dominance there, it can pull that kneecap sideways. So yeah, in short, I would get on a roller, roll those quads out nicely, do some very basic strength exercises, single leg squats, balancing on one leg, that kind of thing, just to really make sure those muscles, the glutes and the quads are firing and activated again, and build up slowly, and then see if those shoes then respond, or the knees respond better to the shoes. That's a better way of wording it. And if not, then there could be a very real issue with how your mechanics are changing in that pair of shoes, which is causing the irritation.
Yeah, I mean, Lindsey, he didn't say as much, but you've also got to be careful that you're not moving from, like, maybe it's a stability shoe to a neutral shoe, as an example. He just mentioned the brand names, and a big change like that could cause issues as well.
Yeah, 100%. So he doesn't mention what the Asics were, but the Brooks He talks about the brand, and that's a neutral shoe, so that shouldn't be an issue. But yes, if the Asics were motion control, absolutely, that might make a difference too.
Cool. Great question. Thank you very much for that, James. Don't forget, if you have a question you'd like to submit, just hit the link that's in the description of this podcast. The next one from Ravi, who's in Durban in South Africa. And Ravi was asking about compression gear. Lindsey, he said, do you recommend wearing compression shorts or socks while running? Do they actually help performance or recovery, or are they mostly just personal preference?
Look, they're mostly personal preference, but there is enough evidence to show that there are a few things that it helps with. Temperature regulation is one of them, oddly enough. And then there's also kind of, particularly with the compression socks and long and ultra distance running, the vibrations of the muscle and essentially holding them in place. So you reduce those vibrations actually helps on longer distance races, just to stave off that kind of feeling of fatigue, if you like. And then there's some work that shows that early in exercise, there's a good proprioceptive benefit to compression tights and compression socks. So there is some evidence out there to show that they do make a difference, and they're quite good. Again, for me personally, and I've shared this a few times on this podcast and other platforms that we have, is that compression socks stimulate compartment pressure syndrome in me. So if I run in compression socks, basically what happens is that my anterior tib and my soleus muscles, they lock out. There's blood comes into the muscles, but the pressure from the compression socks stops the blood from going out. So I get this pressure building up in those two compartments. I start losing feeling in my feet, and then I start losing control and it's just all around unpleasant. So there are some individual cases that must be taken into account. So largely it's absolutely individual preference. And then of course there's enough evidence that I would say give it a try. And if you feel like it's making a difference for you, go for it. And if you're like me, well, bad luck. You don't get to use compression while you're running.
Yeah, and Lindsey, there's a big difference between compression while you're running versus compression after a run. And I've never run in compression socks, so full disclosure here, but I've got a pair of compression socks that I wear like after a long run if I'm quite sore, and I definitely find that they do help. But then taking it a step further is you've got those compression boots that sort of compress and then relax. And I was like, when those things first started gaining popularity, I was like, oh, geez, it's another one of these things. And I ran, it was funnily enough, it was a year ago. Actually, right now, it was exactly a year ago, I ran a half marathon here in Cape Town. And then I was up in Johannesburg, where you live, for a YouTube shoot. And I was super sore after that half marathon. And I used those compression boots for the first time. And I am a convert. So, those sorts of things definitely help from a recovery perspective.
They absolutely do, Brandon. You know, this is what I love about what we do. Like, those boots are like magic, but often out of sight, out of mind. And I was talking last week about how flippant sore I was. And you know what? I forgot that I had those boots. I didn't use them. So they are honestly, those things are unbelievable. I've used them in stage races where I've absolutely killed myself. And then I bang those things on, and I don't want to say I feel like new the next day, but geez, I feel so much better having used them. So I need to put them where I can see them now that I'm training hard again. And yes, so post exercise compression really does work. One of the things that it does is that it prevents the body's natural overstimulus in response to the repair process. And so it reduces the amount of inflammation. So on a very basic level, that even if that's all it does, is that goes a long way to reducing the amount of discomfort that you are in. So it absolutely works a treat. And yes, after we are finished shooting this, I am going to put those back in the bedroom where I can see them so that I use them.
I tell you what, I definitely need to get myself a set that I can use on an ongoing basis. Ravi, thanks for your question. Next one from Michael in New Orleans, Louisiana. Michael says, hi team, quick question about altitude training and timing. I'm in the second half of a race training block and have the opportunity to spend some time at altitude a couple of weeks before race day. I'm training at sea level currently, and the conditions have been tough. Would training at a higher elevation this late in the plan be beneficial, or could it do more harm than good at this stage? Lindsey, I think answer Michael's question, but then just talk us through a little bit what altitude training actually does and how it can benefit. If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, cool. So I mean, I was going to start the question by saying that while you're not getting the same benefits as you'd get at altitude, training in very hot, humid environments does stimulate some of the same adaptations that you get at high altitude. So I'll unpack those as Brad said at the end of the question. And the timing is not great. So we don't want to be training at altitude during our peak training, particularly if we are not adapted to training at altitude. When you go to altitude, you want to have a period of adaptation. You will improve daily, but to be honest, you want to be there for 7 to 10 days before starting to train hard at altitude. So you're going to lose out on 7 to 10 days of really good training because you're going to have to moderate the intensity, moderate the volume, and that's right in the middle of your peak training. So I feel like the timing there is a little bit out, and you're going to experience probably a worse disruption to training than what you're having now, because depending on exactly how high you're going, your body will have an inability to push particularly the high intensity workouts that you want to be doing to run a good marathon. So why would we typically go to altitude? We go to altitude because the body's response to the drop in partial pressure of the oxygen. So as we go higher, there's essentially less oxygen in the air because the air as a whole is thinner. So the response to the body to that, because our bodies, most of the things that happen in our bodies happen across a pressure gradient. And so when there's a high volume of oxygen in the atmosphere, it's easy for that to get into the blood. And therefore, we don't need as many red blood cells because it easily goes into the blood. Now, when that partial pressure of oxygen drops, there's not only less oxygen around, but it's harder for that oxygen to actually go into the blood. And so the response of the body then is to create more red blood cells so that more cells are going past and can pick up fewer oxygen molecules. So the red blood cells themselves can pick up fewer oxygen molecules per red blood cell. And our response is to increase the thickness of the blood through increasing the number of red blood cells. That's essentially what happens when we are at altitude. And as I said at the start here, hot, humid environments also stimulates an increase in red blood cells simply because there's such a high demand for oxygen training in those environments. And it's an artificial demand because so much of your blood is going to keeping you cool. So we've got a much lower blood pool that goes around to the working muscles. And so in response to that, your body jacks up the number of red blood cells so that it's got more red blood cells in that lower volume, if that makes sense. But obviously the stimulation isn't as good as when you are going to altitude. So to just round that one off, Brad, it's like if you do want to do altitude training, you actually want to go nearer the beginning of your training, okay? And here's the good news, is that if you spend 2 weeks at really high altitude, those adaptations will last 8 to 12 weeks. Obviously, towards the end of those, so the 8 to 12, it's got this diminishing tail, okay? But yeah, you typically want to do that earlier on in the training. or spend a long time at altitude so that you adapt to it, and then you can still do some good training and then come back down to sea level for the sharpening up phase of that training block. So you'll want to be 2 to 3 weeks down at sea level to then use those red blood cells to jack up the intensity and then go into race day.
Lindsey, I wanted to ask, can you simulate those conditions? Obviously, there are sort of high altitude chambers that people sleep in and that sort of thing. Does that sort of simulation help? Does it do the same thing as if you were actually at altitude? And similarly, like if you were training indoors on a treadmill, like to simulate hotter, more humid conditions?
Yeah, so you can do that, and I've certainly done that with clients. Again, the adaptation is not going to be quite the same. And the sleeping in the altitude tent one is actually an interesting one, because the one thing that is heavily compromised at altitude is also our ability to recover. So that's why at the beginning, those like first 7 to 14 days, it's quite important not to train so hard, because in that lowered oxygen, we recover slower. So now if you're going to sleep in an oxygen tent to get the red blood cell adaptation, you have to be mindful of the fact that your recovery is going to be compromised. So again, all these things need to be done slowly. I would gradually increase the altitude as we go. I would have, so if I do like a really tough session on Tuesday, then on Tuesday night I wouldn't sleep in the oxygen tent, because I'll want the extra oxygen to recover properly. But perhaps on my easier and recovery days, those are the days that I would choose to sleep. So a couple of nuances in there, but it absolutely works. And then in terms of adapting to heat and humidity, yeah, I've done some weird and wonderful things to myself and to clients when we know that we're going to be competing in ridiculous conditions. Things like boiling a kettle with the lid off, with heaters around the bike. But always when you do those things, you have to understand that there's a cost. And when you start exercising in an extremely hot, humid environment, you've got to be plowing in electrolytes and fluids. Otherwise, you kind of just push yourself down into this deep hole. Sauna, sorry, to wrap this up, something like getting in a sauna 3 times a week for 30 to 40 minutes if you're prepping for a very hot, humid race is a great way to help you adapt to going into that environment if you don't have any other options.
There's my second thing onto the wish list, Lindsey, is after the compression boots is an at-home sauna. I definitely want one of those as well. That is my next thing to be added to the list. And while we're making those lists, I also want a cold plunge. So we'll just throw that in there too. So those are triple whammy if you want to know what to get me for Christmas, Coach.
I've got one of those at the moment. I mean, you'd have to fly up here, but you can climb in my swimming pool anytime you like.
Too good. It's so funny that you were talking about loading up on electrolytes, because that feeds really nicely into our next question, which is from Zanele Dlamini, who is in Joburg, your neck of the woods, Lindsey. Zanele was saying, I have a race coming up soon, and I'm a bit concerned about cramping. I've got my nutrition, fluids, carbs, and gel sorted, but I'm wondering if I should be adding salt tablets. I've been training this winter, so it's been a bit cooler, but the race will likely be a bit warmer. If it's hot on race day, I know I'll be sweating more than normal. Do you recommend taking salt tablets in that case? If so, when during the run should I be taking them? It's so funny that this question is here, Lindsey, because I got a message from our club captain asking me to do a talk with our newbie marathon runners next week on this exact topic, and I haven't messaged him back yet, but I'm definitely not comfortable doing a talk on this, so maybe I'll just play him your answer. What's the deal with regards to Zanele and salt tablets?
So look, I would go back to the previous answer and tell Zanele, like if you've got access to a gym and you can get into some saunas and do that, because he's right to be concerned, because one of the problems when we don't heat adapt, the composition of our sweat changes. Okay, so we will lose more fluids and less electrolytes, but the body needs to make that adaptation. If you just go from training in a normal dry, even if it's a dry, hot environment where sweating is very effective, and so we don't sweat nearly as much, because that sweat really does help to cool us down. When we move into warm, humid, particularly if we're going from warm, dry or from cold, dry, which is what Joburg is at the moment, you will lose a much higher proportion of electrolytes while exercising. And so you do want to replace electrolytes. it gets a little bit complicated in that, okay, but how much? And that is a bit unique to the individual, and particularly when we try to isolate specific electrolytes. So whether it's salt or magnesium or calcium, all of the above, geez, listen to me, all of the above play a role in muscle contraction. Okay. So which is the one that's responsible for you cramping, if any of them are responsible for cramping, is very difficult. And so I wouldn't go for that like singular approach unless you're able to get yourself to one of the universities in Johannesburg or Pretoria to do some sweat testing on yourself and then work out what electrolytes you are losing. I would go for a much broader spectrum strategy where you use something like a rehydrate or other electrolyte replacement formula. And then you can go with the general guidelines, because the general guidelines are normally conservative enough that you won't overdo it, but you almost certainly will get just enough. So you'll be somewhere in the middle, and that's kind of where you want to be, and it will help to improve the situation. And then you kind of got to be a little bit intuitive on race day. I mean, if it's a stinker of a day, then you probably want to increase that intake. And if it's just a bit warmer, like if it's a marathon distance race, and that's why this answer is also a little bit difficult. So I don't know if you're talking about an ultra or a marathon, but those will be different. But let's say it's a marathon, and then I would say one sachet or whatever recommended number of tablets, or whatever that is, with like 600 mils of fluid over the whole race. So you can split that into 2 doses or 3 doses. And then if it's a stinker of a day, I'd probably double that. So that's just a general look at it. And if you want to get more specific, you do need to go, at the very least, I'd go and see a dietitian so they can help you work that out.
I mean, something like this, Lindsey, you mentioned make sure, like, it's not, you won't be taking too much that is dangerous. Is taking too much salt like this, is it a cause of danger? And the second thing is, should runners generally be doing this? Like, I mean, I see people like, and this is at Comrades, I see people just grabbing salt, like not that they're cramping or they're struggling, they just feel like they need to take it because other people are taking it.
So it's probably not dangerous. In fact, I'd argue the opposite. I'd argue that if your sodium in particular drops low enough, that's probably dangerous. That'll push you into what's called hyponatremia, or they call it overhydration, but it's actually a dilution of your sodium. So yeah, having too much is probably not dangerous, but it can stimulate the exact thing that you're trying to avoid. So if you have this hyper concentrated calcium, sodium, magnesium, that could trigger the cramps from just having too many electrolytes in the system. But I would say too many is probably not dangerous. And if you drink to thirst, this is the thing, the human body is pretty good at looking after itself. So you say people who are reaching for salt, if you feel like you need something salty, then you probably need salt. And so, I mean, I wouldn't choose to do it that way. I can't just need salt. Maybe a potato lightly salted, I can't imagine doing like a teaspoon of salt, for example. That's making me feel sick thinking about it, never mind after I've been running for 7 hours. So yes, if you're getting like a bit of a craving for salt, probably a good idea to have some potato chips or some beef jerky, biltong, something like that. But yeah, in this case, I would probably just plan to have a little electrolyte drink that I can sip on as I'm running the race.
Awesome stuff, Zanele. Thank you so much for your question. Lindsey, you do see some weird things at ultras. One thing, I don't think I've told you this, one thing I did see at Comrades was some guy it was one of those sachets of Revive, which is like the rehydrate sort of thing, and literally smashed it straight out of the sachet. It's a powder. And then took a mouthful of water. I was like, I can't think of anything worse. And this is later on in the race. I was like, oh my hat. Thought I'd seen everything until I saw that. That is for sure.
That'd be like when we were kids and we used to put Trito on our tongue. And it was like super bitter because it's like mega concentrated drink mix. Yeah, so that's I don't think I'd be up for that at 60 Ks either.
I guess it might make a change from all the sweet gels, so it's just like a change on the palate. But I don't think I could stomach that even without having run 60 Ks. Never mind 60 Ks into an ultra. Lindsey, as always, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for answering those questions. And don't forget, if you have got questions you'd like answered, what you can do is click on the link that's in the description of this podcast, either on whatever podcast player you're listening on or on YouTube. We do filter the video questions to the top, so we love seeing and hearing from you wherever you are in the world. Please send them through, and we'll make sure we answer them on an upcoming episode of the Fast to Beyond 50 podcast. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't yet, to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. Until next time, from the two of us, it's cheers.
Cool. Cheers, Brad.